Mike.
I'm Sam. Let's get into it.
Hello, Gardner Minshew here. After a long rookie year, I've decided to take a step back, recenter myself the only way I know how. Hopping in my brand new RV and touring this great country.
Welcome to episode 41. Today we're going to talk about some football, and then we're going to go back into the NBA playoffs, as that's the whole talk of the football or sports world right now is NBA basketball. But last night we had our first football of some sorts for quite some time. So I think the last game we saw was the national championship with LSU versus Clemson. Fast forward to yesterday, we had Austin Peay versus Central Arkansas, which was an FCS level game. I mean, it's not your blue bloods, Ohio State or Alabama, but it was a fun game to watch. Good highlights. What were your thoughts on this FCS game and kind of the way it played out, and like kind of what they did with all the COVID thing? What's your thoughts on that?
Definitely a stark contrast, especially schematically from some of these bigger name schools, even these smaller name schools that are really notorious for some of their offensive and defensive philosophies. I know a lot of schools are really put onto the map because of things like their spread offense, their pro style offense, or their air raid offense. And it's not really what we saw last night with what Austin Peay and Central Arkansas, the Bears. So, I mean, really my takeaway from that game was usually when I'm watching these levels of competition, it's usually pretty poor quarterback play and pretty elite running back play, or I guess elite running back play by comparison. That's certainly what happened last night. I think both running backs on both teams for their respective starting positions averaged about 10 yards a carry, which was really explosive. Obviously, the game that was a little bit inflated considering the first play of the game was a 75-yard touchdown. I love that start to football, and I think that's really a key indicator of what we're going to see with all levels of football going forward is week one, you're either going to get those offenses that are really stalling and are really just underperforming, or B, you're going to get those defenses who just aren't really used to the 100% level of intensity that football is. So I think we saw on that first play, the defense straight up was just kind of in practice mode, not in game mode. And they were like, wow, these guys are this fast. So I was really just glad to see that and just glad to see football back.
Yeah, it was fun to watch. You definitely could tell it was FCS by
Yeah.
some of the mistakes and just how some stuff played out. I mean, there was a lot of turnovers in that game. I think
Yeah.
two fumbled punts. The punter like fumbled the snap twice, which was you don't really see often inside football games. But yeah, I mean, it was fun to watch. It was football, but FCS is a little different. I know next week we're gonna have some more. We're gonna have FBS games, which is gonna be probably a lot more televised. A lot more people are going to tune into those games because it is FBS and not FCS. But I actually was pretty like it. I was astonished how I did notice some fans in the crowd. I didn't know if it was like
Yeah.
players' families or actually just people who like Austin Peay football. But I'm surprised there were fans in the crowd for that game.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I thought it was kind of unnoticeable at first that there were fans, but then I kind of started to notice, oh yeah, there are fans. Maybe it was just like you said, the families of some of the players or something of that nature, but I really don't know how they went about letting fans in, and it's going to be interesting to see across the football world how we're going to handle these fans. I know the Arizona Cardinals, for example, already announced their first two home games, which I believe is week 2 and week 3 and week 4 of the NFL season. They won't have home fans. So I think it's going to be good to kind of go on a week to week basis with that, but it's certainly going to inflate the prices of tickets.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Even if you can only let in like 5,000 people, that's really going to jack up the prices. Not just like through the teams, but with like Ticketmaster and StubHub, where it is that third party seller. That's where the prices are gonna get jacked up a lot, especially for kind of like bigger and more important games.
Yeah, certainly. And a little bit of news coming out recently, what yesterday out of the SEC world was very notable potential top 10 pick in the 2021 draft. Jamar Chase, I believe, just kind of opted out of his season with the LSU hype train really going as normal. I see a lot of kind of hype videos coming out of the LSU camp, and it really looks like they're hungry and they're really just have a chip on their shoulder so many guys left LSU via the draft, via opting out. Here's another one, probably their best returning player. So, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see what their new quarterback can do and what they can do without their best player, arguably, in Jamar Chase.
Yeah. Arguably, Jamar Chase is probably one of the best football players in the whole country. Period. He is a special wide receiver, but I mean, it's just a stark contrast because I think 2 weeks ago he was tweeting on Twitter like hashtag we want to play, and then he just goes out and opts out, which is very interesting to kind of depict a little bit. But yeah, LSU obviously they just pure dominance last year, but it's going to be hard for them to kind of come back from this because they've lost so many players in the draft. So many, I think it was probably 20 of the 22 starters from last year are gone. So it's going to really show how Coach O's, if he is a really good head coach, if he's able to kind of corral his troops and have them win some football games.
Yeah, certainly. I think Coach O is just stylistically, he's one of those coaches where he's the motivator. He's kind of the CEO type head coach where he oversees the operations, but he's not really involved necessarily in the day-to-day schematics of the offense and the defense too much, I believe. I mean, I'm not going to underplay his value to a football team, but I certainly think he's kind of a motivator archetype of coach rather than X's and O's guys. But I'm going to kind of relate this Jamar Chase news into some NFL news and how I think it actually directly impacted this trade. So Yannick Ngakoue, who's on the trade market for, I mean, what it seems like to be at least a year. Usually when a guy is refusing to play for a team, his draft value is very, very low. We see guys like Darius Slay get traded for a fourth-round pick. Guys of that nature who are really good football players just get traded for really low draft picks because their value has decreased just because of kind of the situation surrounding them. But I was really interested to see the Vikings willing to give up a second-round pick for Ngakoue, not because that's not his value as a football player, but because that's not his value as kind of where the league is headed. But kind of made me think, like, with this Jamar Chase news, with all these players opting out, with kind of the uncertainty of the college football season, I think some really smart franchises are really, really willing to give up first-round picks, second-round picks, third-round picks this season and next season just because of the uncertainty surrounding the draft, the uncertainty surrounding which players are going to declare, which players are going to not have film for a full year. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that because there's just so much uncertainty. I mean, this is the case for the NBA draft as well. There's this like people are scared like outside of the top like 5 best players in the NBA draft. They don't know who's good and who's not. But yeah, I completely agree with the NFL. There's just players are opting out and they're not going to get football level action if when they're training. I mean, you can, like we said in I think multiple episodes, multiple times, you can train as hard as you want. You can work so much in the offseason, but when you get into game speed, it's so different than just training. That's why I think the Vikings, I think they won this trade because I think
Me too.
you trade your second round pick for Ngakoue, who you know is going to be a stud, who you know is going to be a game changer for you, because they did lose a lot this offseason. They lost Everson Griffin. They did really just they are a defensive oriented team, but they did lose quite a bit on their defensive side of the football. So with getting Ngakoue, they traded a second round pick, which is you could get great talent in the second round, but I don't think it will match up to Ngakoue's skill.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, Vikings kind of trading to these organizations who are unproven through the draft. I think it's really telling that the Vikings of all teams are willing to trade a second round pick for a guy because the Vikings are historically a team who are very, very good at drafting on day 2, day 3, day 4 of the NFL draft. I mean, not only on the defensive side of the ball, almost all their players are kind of day 2, day 3 guys of the NFL draft, but even on the offensive side, quite recently, Stephon Diggs was a late round pick. Adam Thielen, of course, was a very late round pick. I mean, you have these guys. I mean, Kirk Cousins, I know they didn't draft Kirk, but he was a very late round pick as well. Dalvin Cook is a second rounder. So, I mean, for any team to be willing to trade a second round pick and have it be the Vikings, a team that is really uses their second round pick very valuably. Again, I think that's very telling to kind of look at the college football world, look at where it's headed with COVID right now, and kind of say these draft picks aren't as valuable as they really seem.
Yeah, yeah, like you said, Ngakoue was kind of just requested a trade throughout this whole offseason, and he was so adamant about not playing. And I wonder if a similar kind of thing is going to play out with Leonard Fournette because we don't know if
Yeah.
he's going to want to play. I don't know, just it's crazy to think about how the Jaguars were one play away from potentially making a Super Bowl, and now their whole team is just gone and there's no one there, and it's a two-world contrast for them.
Yeah, and I think it was honestly really predictable that this ended up happening with the Jaguars, not only because they're not a very stable organization, but just the nature of kind of their team. It was kind of limped to the finish line. We have a really bad quarterback. We're going to run the football. We have a young running back with already a lot of miles on them. So the offense was already really shaky to begin with. And then the defense, I mean, you had a lot of big personalities on that defense, obviously led by Jalen Ramsey and company. And really, defense more than offense is not really sustainable, and it usually doesn't carry over year to year like offense does. So, I mean, they kind of started into the next season with a couple hiccups defensively. Then, I mean, the tensions really rose, and now you see, I mean, people are saying they're going to get the number one pick in the NFL draft next year, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. So, I mean, it's certainly interesting to see the turn that the Jaguars have taken. And again, I think the most interesting thing with this team, I know we're going a little off topic here, but is to see, are they going to give Gardner Minshew a legitimate fair shot, or is he kind of just their tank quarterback?
Yeah, before I dive into Gardner Minshew, I just want to say that because you just talked about how the defense, like keeping a defensive squad together, is a very hard thing to do because, like the Broncos, they won the Super Bowl and then four key players left the year after they won the Super
Yep.
Bowl, just like the Jaguars had that rally, then they all got depleted 2 years later. But I think the Vikings, they've always had a good defense. They've always kind of
Mhm.
brought guys in after guys left, and that Mike Zimmer just does a really great job at getting the personnel that he wants on his team to just have a really just steady level defense throughout what a 5 year tender that he has.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's certainly really impressive for that to be the case because, again, like you said, defense isn't too sustainable in the NFL.
Yeah, but Gardner Minshew, I don't know. He's a fun guy to watch. I do sadly think he is going to be that tank quarterback because I mean, if you have the first overall pick and you have the opportunity to get a Trevor Lawrence or a Justin Fields, I don't think you can really pass up on him to because Gardner Minshew, I know he's I don't think he's a franchise quarterback at this point in his career.
Yeah, I certainly don't think he's proven it. And I mean, Gardner Minshew, it makes it much easier to kind of part ways with him, considering he was a fourth round pick. They didn't invest a lot in him. So him being really good or him even being a starting level quarterback was kind of just a luxury at that point, in my opinion. And I mean, it's not like this is unprecedented to have a young quarterback play good and then have another quarterback be drafted over him. Of course, we saw that situation unfold with Josh Rosen, Kyler Murray, and the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, they invested a really high pick on him, a 10th pick in the draft. They had to trade up for him, trade multiple draft picks for him, and then the next year they're trading him for a second round pick and selecting Kyler Murray with the first pick in the draft. So it's certainly not unprecedented and certainly a more drastic situation than what will unfold in Jacksonville potentially. Again, it has played out, so if the Jaguars have the first round or the first pick in the NFL draft, I'd be very surprised to see a non-quarterback go off the board.
Yeah, I mean they can keep Gardner Minshew, and I think he can easily become one of the best backups in all of football because he does have that kind of those attributes that do make him a starting quarterback. So if they want to keep him, and because I mean Justin Fields, he runs a lot, so he has a high kind of injury level that can scare the Vikings. I mean the Jaguars, and so they would keep Minshew on board. Also, looking at Trevor Lawrence, he is a tall player, but he's very slender, so that can kind of be wary about him getting injured a lot. So Minshew could stay on the Jaguars as a backup for his career until like he does find a better opportunity on a different team.
Yeah, and what makes me kind of confident in these quarterbacks coming in to, Jacksonville potentially is when you have a backup quarterback who's so captivating and polarizing of a figure and really is one of those guys who walks into the locker room and everyone loves him right away. Everyone wants to rally around him and everyone wants to play for him. I think even if he's worse than your starting quarterback, that's very intimidating and it kind of makes shifts and kind of riffs in the locker room like, ooh, should we go with this guy? I like playing for this guy better, even though this guy's not a better quarterback. But I think Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields and even potentially Trey Lance, I think they all have the personality traits to kind of overcome that really big personality at the backup quarterback position. And I think they could definitely take an organization and be the leader and be the face of that organization right away.
No, I think they are very great leaders. It's like having Jim McMahon as your backup quarterback. They're Minshew and Jim McMahon have similar characteristics. They're very kind of loud and in your face type of people. I mean, I love both of them, but yeah, I'm curious to see what's going to happen. I mean, Justin Fields, he's my guy, and I would be a little sad if he went to the black hole that is the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, he'd go from favorite hometown hero to but heading into some of the NBA playoff games now, I know we have a really exciting matchup tonight, the Jazz versus the Nuggets. I know that's going to be a really good matchup, but kind of going into some of the second round matchups, we had one today where we had the Toronto Raptors playing the Celtics, and I think this is a really, really interesting series because I think potentially the Celtics are a better team than the Raptors, but it's one of those situations where I don't want the Celtics to win just because I think the Raptors are a better matchup for the Bucks come Eastern Conference playoff time. And I kind of want to see the team who could beat the Bucks kind of prevail out of this series, but I really strongly believe that's not going to happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, before the playoffs started, the Raptors were my dark horse to make the NBA Finals. I just think they were a great, just, just they were just a squad. They played well together. But looking at this, I mean, the Celtics, they are shaky and sporadic at points, but they're playing really well when it means the most. I mean, they just swept the 76ers. They just
Hmm.
beat the Raptors pretty handily. So I could potentially see the Celtics. I mean, I don't want to say it, but I think they can wrap up this series pretty early if they do play like they've been playing the past 5 games. And then the matchup between potentially the Celtics and the Bucks. I don't know. Giannis, if he if he's getting playing against a team like the Celtics, who they don't have as much length and just defensive tenaciousness as the Raptors, that Giannis could kind of dominate the Celtics and potentially make his first NBA Finals.
Yeah, I don't mean to hate on the Toronto Raptors right now, but just for a minute, I think we need to realize and kind of acknowledge that I'm going to use a little analogy at first. If you roll a die 6 times and you roll an even 5 times out of the six, the even roll is, it's the non-anomaly. It's something that happens more often than not. And I think for the Toronto Raptors, we need to realize that throughout this entire 2010s decade, they were really, really bad in the playoffs. They're always a really good regular season team, and they always performed if they came up short in the playoffs, always played really bad in the playoffs. And just overall, the Raptors kind of culture and just way of playing their play style with just really having so many role players take around 14 shots a game rather than two superstars take 25 shots a game, that really ends up biting them in the ass come playoff time, quite frankly. And that's absolutely, I just saw old Raptors playoff basketball today. And that's what really worries me about the Raptors moving forward because you can't have guys like Fred VanVleet shoot 14 shots a game. I know he's good and I know he shows flashes, but he's a role player at the end of the day. You have guys like Norman Powell taking a lot of shots, even guys like Serge Ibaka taking a lot of shots. Kyle Lowry didn't play well today to the point where it really does make me nervous about this Raptors team and kind of thinking that last season was an anomaly and they're kind of going to relegate back to the mean, which is being bad in the playoffs. And again, they played okay the first round. They didn't really amaze me or wow me. They played the Nets. I think the Nets were the worst team in the playoffs, in my opinion, by far. So, I mean, just going ahead in this series, you have a lot of really good players on that Celtics team, and I think it just absolutely overwhelmed them today. I certainly think it's going to be a close series, but right now, as it looks, I do think the Celtics are going to win the series.
Yeah, I think game two is the Raptors need to come out in game two like it's a game seven if they want to compete in this series at all. I think, like you said, I think this the star power and like just the scoring ability on these Celtics it's better than the Raptors right now because I mean you have Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum. I mean those are just two studs right there already, so it's gonna be hard for them to kind of compete with that.
Yeah, now I do not anticipate Marcus Smart really performing as well as he did offensively, but even so, you kind of take away his offensive contributions. I still do think the Celtics win today, probably by a very slim margin. But again, going forward and looking at this series, kind of looking at how all these guys are going to be played, the same problem I've kind of mentioned with the Raptors all year still prevails, and they don't have that go-to scorer. They don't have that guy, not only at the end of the games that could set the tone, but it's so important for you to have that guy that could set the tone at the beginning of the game, that guy that it's tip off and then he scores 8 straight points for you and all of a sudden you're up 8-2, kind of setting the tone that way. And the Raptors really don't have that basketball player on their team right now. And again, that really worries me going forward. I think versus a team like the Bucks, they can kind of make up for that in a sense because the Bucks don't have any guy like that except for Giannis Antetokounmpo. But again, the Celtics, if you can win with Jason Tatum scoring 21 points, scoring around 20, and just kind of all your players playing really well, then I think this Celtics team is, again, one of the best, if not the best team in the East as of right now.
Yeah, it's going to be. Yeah, like you said, the Raptors just don't have a bucket getter that they can give the ball to, and just when they're in a tough situation. And I mean, like Fred VanVleet, he tries to be that player sometimes. I mean, like you said, he is a role player, and I think he might leave this offseason. I think the Knicks are going to
Yeah.
try to overpay him an extreme amount, which, of course, the Knicks are going to nick. But I don't think the Raptors are going to win this series. I think the Celtics. I think at this point, the Celtics are the favorite to make the finals out of the East.
Yeah, certainly. His free agency situation really reminds me of Terry Rozier, where it's obvious. I think at this point, maybe it's Toronto where with Terry Rozier, it's Boston. You're in Boston. You're more confident in guy because you think you can get more free agents because you're kind of a big market. Whereas I think a team like the Raptors are much more hesitant to let guys walk. But again, I think it is kind of the writing on the wall. This player is not as good as he's going to get paid, and he's going to get paid by an even smaller market team, most likely, come this offseason.
Yeah, moving on to another round one series I want to talk about a little bit. The Clippers Mavericks. The Clippers won the series and they're moving on. But a point I want to bring up about the Clippers, they just they've became in my mind like a very, very hateful team, and just I don't really like them that much anymore. I mean, you look at someone like at the beginning of the game when the fight broke out, Marcus Morris just like his intention was to go and kind of hit Luka and get him a little rattled. And then, I mean, I think it was the game before Michael Kidd-Gilchrist shot a three and it kind of was a brick. And then Patrick Beverley is just like snickering on the sideline with Montrezl Harrell. I think they're just a very obnoxious team in my mind. It's a stark contrast from Patrick Beverley, Montrezl Harrell, Marcus Morris, and then Kawhi, who just sits there silently. It's very, very interesting to kind of dissect and look at.
You hit it right on the head. I really want to mention that. I don't understand how you're a non-Clippers fan and actually like the Clippers and root for them and want them to win. I mean, they've kind of become the NBA villain in the sense that they play atrocious basketball in terms of just watching it. I think they play a very ugly brand of basketball. They just not a lot of fundamentals, not a lot of ball movement, just a lot of individual guys kind of working towards a common goal. And again, they're just very dirty. They're very chippy. They like to get under guys' skins. They want to find any advantage possible to kind of end up winning the game. And you know what? This doesn't surprise me because their head coach is Doc Rivers. I think Doc Rivers has always coached dirty teams, chippy teams, teams that like to talk a lot of shit to kind of gain an upper hand in the series, kind of playing that mental aspect of the game. And that's where they're going to end up playing the Jazz most likely, if not the Nuggets next round. I think that's going to be honestly even easier than the Mavericks this series, because I think with the Mavericks, you had some guys that wanted to talk back, whereas the Jazz, I don't know if Rudy Gobert could kind of deal with that. But I mean, once you get to the Lakers, once you get to the Rockets, you have so many veteran guys on that team at that point where they don't really give a shit. I don't think the mental aspect of the game really affects them as much as a young team like the Mavericks would, or a younger team like the Jazz would. So, I mean, this team, I think they're a very flawed team, and I think they're going to eventually really run into a roadblock.
Yeah, which I think we are shooing for a battle of LA in the Western Conference Finals. I think the Lakers did impress with their first round victory over the Trailblazers, and I think that they are going to win if they play the Thunder or the Rockets. But yeah, I think when they played the Western or the LA teams play each other in the Western Conference Finals, I like you said, I don't think that trash talking is going to get in the head with LeBron or AD. I think the trash talking could affect someone like Kuzma a lot. I
Yeah.
think he's very kind of an immature player, but
Mhm.
I just don't. I think it's gonna be a lot tougher for these Clippers to win basketball games based off of like sloppy tendencies, like street ball play, rather than kind of the Lakers who do play more fundamental basketball.
Yeah, certainly. And kind of touching upon that Lakers series real quick, what it showed me more than anything is that they could win. They can kind of win decisively when their role players are still not playing up to par. I mean, even that last night's game where they ended up winning in a gentleman's sweep, um, their role players just really didn't play well. They just really did not perform to expectations, and they still ended up winning by 15, 16 points. So, I mean, Anthony Davis and LeBron James, I mean, they're a force to be reckoned with. I know I just saw a stat. LeBron averaged about 28 points a game on 60% field goal percentage on 33 minutes a game. I mean, Anthony Davis as well. I think he averaged near 30 points for this playoff series. And I mean, again, looking forward, we're only getting into the second round. If guys like Chris Middleton keep playing like Chris Middleton, if guys like Paul George keep playing like Paul George, these really good teams aren't going to make it out of the second round or make it out of the third round or win the finals because, again, you need your quote unquote second star to really step up. And I know Paul George had a really good game 5, but then he really again he went down to the mean in game 6. He played really, really poorly in game 6 again. So I mean that's just another example of Paul George just not playing well in the playoffs. So again, I'm really worried for some of these teams like the Clippers, like the Bucks, but confident in a team like the Lakers because they're the only team in the entire league, in my opinion, who have their both two superstars playing like superstars. Because even Russell Westbrook in his first game back, I think he shot 2 for 12. I think he had like 6 points or something like that. Played atrocious. So just really projecting forward, I think the Lakers are looking good with their two superstars playing like superstars.
Yeah, obviously we know LeBron is a dog in the playoffs. That's nothing that we really need to talk about. But yeah, Anthony Davis, despite a player who's had a lack of playoff experience in his time in the NBA, he's playing very, very well, and it shows how good he really is. I mean, like you said, Chris Middleton is sucking. He's just a bad playoff performer. Paul George, pandemic P, like you like to say, he's bad as well. But just Anthony Davis, if he's able to perform like he did the first round, if LeBron's able to perform like he did, the Lakers are I think they're gonna have a kind of a not a cake. I don't want to say a cakewalk, but it's gonna be a easier walk to the finals than a lot of people thought was gonna happen.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think for LeBron, if he ends up winning the finals this year, I don't anticipate him or it being his most impressive finals series, but I do anticipate it being arguably his most impressive finals run because if he ends up getting to the finals, I mean, he had to go through the Portland Trailblazers, who were one of the best seeded teams in recent memory. Then he would have had to gone through most likely the Rockets, who again are a very good team. They've always been that finals hunt ever since James Harden got there in 2015. Then most likely they would end up going through the Clippers, who again were really formed to stop this Lakers team. And then he would end up having to face a team like the Miami Heat, a team like the Bucks, a team like the Celtics, or even a team like the Raptors, who overall are just a very solid team and a much well-rounded roster than the Lakers are. So again, I mean, this is a lot of legacy is on the line here, and I think he really realizes that, and I think he realizes he has to step up.
Yeah, yeah. I think after that 10-point game he had, he really just switched into a different gear, and he's just hasn't looked back since.
Yeah, certainly. But kind of going into our last series here, I think we really haven't talked about much. I know we kind of alluded to the Bucks a little bit. We kind of alluded to the Heat series. Both of them, or no, the Bucks had a gentleman's sweep. and the Miami Heat ended up sweeping the Pacers, which I think I was very surprised about, to be honest. But kind of looking forward to the last series that I'm yet to talk about in
The Bucks? Are we talking about the
my
Bucks series?
thinking. I guess so. We can talk about the Bucks series, but the Miami Heat are the only team in the Eastern Conference, I believe, to beat the Bucks twice in the regular season, which I think is really impressive. I mean, they match up really well defensively against them. Bam Adebayo and company have just been really good on the defensive side, especially defending the paint this year. And they're really going to force the Bucks to make perimeter shots, which they've been proven to be able to do this far in the playoffs. So I certainly think this is going to be a pretty tough matchup for the Bucks.
Yeah, the Heat are a very gritty, grimy team, and they'll get like their hands dirty. I think Bam Adebayo is a kind of a great matchup against Giannis. I think he is a tall, lanky guy like Giannis. I mean, you can't really, Giannis is hard to stop. I think Bam will do a really great job or some sort of job to do it. But yeah, I think the Heat, they could win that series. I think they're a really great team. They have great defensive ability. They have great shooting with Duncan Robinson. And I mean, Jimmy Butler, I know he's lacking, his shooting isn't the greatest, but he is a great leader and he knows how to rally the troops. And I think that kind of makes him a better player in the playoffs than Giannis because he does know how to like pick up a player when he fell on the ground and kind of get that kind of momentum going.
Yeah, I agree, and I just think the Miami Heat are a better late game team than the Bucks are at this point. If the Miami Heat could really just take them all game, kind of have it close going into the fourth quarter, I mean, the Jimmy Butler driving kick has been legitimate and has been real this season. I know he averages his highest amount of assists per game in his career this year, and it really shows come fourth quarter where Jimmy Butler does such a great job at shaking his first defender, really having the defense suck in. And then you just have so many great shooters around Jimmy Butler to the point where Giannis Antetokounmpo is better at what I just described Jimmy Butler to do. The difference is there that they don't have guys to catch and shoot from. I mean, you're not going to have Kyle Korver out there late game because of his defense. You're not going to have guys like Pat Connaughton and guys like that off the bench out there late game again because of their defense. So now you're relying upon guys like Chris Middleton, who's not necessarily a sharpshooter, relying on guys like Eric Bledsoe, who hasn't been good in the playoffs. I mean, even guys like the Brooke Lopez and Robin Lopez twins. I mean, I don't even think I'm too confident in them kind of taking a late game shot compared to a guy like Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, even a guy like Kelly Olynyk who could shoot from three. I mean, I'm just more confident in the Miami Heat. So I do think if the Bucks end up winning this series, it's because they kind of pull away come fourth quarter.
Yeah, the Heat, they are a 21st century built NBA team with 3-and-D, and that's how you win games nowadays. And I mean, they played well. I think next year they can even make a jump to become one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference. I mean, they already are, but I think next year they can be fighting for kind of the 1 or 2 seed.
Yeah, certainly. And kind of going off that point, I guess one last thing I would like to talk about is the Mavericks and kind of looking forward and projecting forward for this team because, I mean, I think it's really impressive to take the Clippers to 6 games, a really, again, like we were talking about, really chippy, kind of trying to get in your head Clippers team without KP. I mean, I think it's really impressive. It's really sad to see him get injured yet again. I think his lower body, just his kind of hips down, are very fragile. I think we can say that at this point in his young career. But I mean, going forward, it's really disappointing that this free agency run is kind of going to be boring, but kind of looking forward to 2 off seasons. And even this one, if they want to make trades, I mean, if they can kind of surround them with a third star, a third perimeter player, not named Tim Hardaway Jr., because I think he just proved to be really just inefficient and hot and cold. And come playoff time, you just can't have a basketball player like that starting in your lineup. So, again, if the Mavericks are able to really surround Luka with great young players or even really good veterans like Mark Cuban has done throughout Dirk Nowitzki's career, and really what Mark Cuban has done throughout his Mavericks tenure, because I think since he bought the Mavericks in the early 2000s or the late 90s, I think he's been one of the best owners in the entire NBA because, I mean, time and time again, we see the Mavericks either be a really good young rebuilding team or a team that's winning 60 games a year, and that's what they did under Dirk Nowitzki, and that's what I really anticipate them doing very soon under Luka Doncic.
like Trey Burke, he's played great this series. Tim Hardaway had some great moments. Seth Curry shot well, but those are not players that can be your or your third option on a championship winning team. I think Mark Cuban and the front office for the Mavericks really need to be kind of do their due diligence this offseason and try to make a kind of maybe a draft night trade or some sort of trade. I don't know what the free agency market is this year, but they need to kind of be very on their toes to get another star with Luka and Kristaps.
Yeah, I guess the most exciting free agent would be like Domantas Sabonis, who is a really good player. I mean, I think he already has an all-star game under his belt, but besides that, really no exciting free agents. So I wonder if guys like Bradley Beal end up getting shipped out, guys of that nature just end up leaving their team. So I certainly think we're going to see at least one huge trade this offseason. I really do strongly believe that. It just is a matter of which team is going to kind of pull the trigger.
I mean, Bradley Beal would be very great because Luka. I mean, he does shoot a lot, but he had to shoot a lot for them to stay in the games. But if he is a distributor, he's a creator. If they get a spot up shooter like Bradley Beal, someone similar to Klay Thompson, I know Klay Thompson is a great talent, and there's not a lot of players like him. But if they can get
Yeah.
someone like that type of player who can be a spot up shooter and just move around the perimeter, that would be really helpful for Luka Doncic and him becoming a bona fide stud.
Yeah, I mean, even Luka's rookie year, we saw how much potential there was for another really good guard to play alongside him because we had Dennis Smith Jr. in his sophomore year when Luka was a rookie, and I can't even count the amount of times off the top of my head where Luka would make a great play, then he would spot up Dennis Smith Jr. for a wide open three and just a wide open kind of lane, just a wide open floor to create. And Dennis Smith Jr., not a good shooter, not a good finisher around the rim because of his size. For whatever reason, that just didn't work out because his play style really didn't match with Luka. But again, I was kind of looking at that situation and saying, boy, if Dennis Smith Jr. could shoot, if Dennis Smith Jr. could drive efficiently, I mean, this guy's going to be a 20-point per game scorer. And that's really what I believe any guy along Luka Doncic who is aggressive, who has that mentality, who is a good shooter, who is a good scorer, I really do think that the Mavericks could have three players averaging over 20 points per game.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about who they can actually trade for, and I think the best option would be Bradley Beal. I think his situation with the Wizards is pretty terrible. So I mean, personally, if I was him, I would want to leave and go to the Mavericks. It just seems like a better option for him. So we'll see if Mark Cuban tries to make some very aggressive moves to get him on the team.
Yeah, certainly. And one more guy, real quick, that I would like to throw out there, another perimeter guy, is a guy who, after kind of getting swept in the playoffs, I really have heard rumblings about him wanting to leave because of kind of contract kind of just arguments, and that's Victor Oladipo. I mean, Victor Oladipo, before he had that big injury with the Pacers, was looking like a borderline superstar. I mean, he was looking great on the offensive side and the defensive side. Kind of had that injury and hasn't been the same since, but I think it's going to be a prove it year next year for Victor Oladipo. He's going to want to prove to kind of earn that big contract that he hasn't gotten in the NBA yet. So I wouldn't be surprised if he went to a team for a 1-year rental and kind of felt it out and see how he performs on that team. So I think Victor Oladipo to the Mavericks right now, I think that would be an incredible move for both parties. And I really do think Victor Oladipo would be a really good compliment to Luka, even though he's not the best shooter in the world.
Yeah, I think that would be a good compliment. I just don't know like what the Pacers would take to ship Oladipo out because he is a great player and he's kind of one of their main contributors for that roster. So I mean, if they did package someone like Hardaway and maybe Finney Smith to get Oladipo, I mean that can work, and then some draft picks piled in there as well.
Yeah, certainly. And I think a key in to see what they're going to do, the Pacers, is who are they going to hire as their head coach, because they just ended up firing their head coach. And it's one of those situations where if they hire a guy like Tom Thibodeau, then I think it's very obvious that they're trying to move forward and be a higher seeded team in the East, and they're going to try to be more competitive. But if they end up hiring a guy who is really more of a Kenny Atkinson type coach where he's really big into player development, I think we see the Pacers take one step back to eventually take two steps forward, where I think they will end up trading Sabonis or they will end up trading Victor Oladipo, and they'll kind of gut their roster a little bit and kind of prepare for the future. So again, keep an eye on who the Pacers end up signing as their head coach, and I think that's going to be a key indicator of what is going to happen for Victor Oladipo.
Well, we hope you guys enjoy this episode. We had fun talking about sports, of course. We'll see you in the next one.